Okay, you can see that we have been growing now for 9 years consecutively from 2010. Unfortunately, I don't have the marker here. You can see from 2010 we've been growing every year. Generally, whenever you have a cyclone, you'll see that the economy goes into negative growth for obvious reasons, because of the damage, etc. But with Winston, even though Winston wiped off 1/3 of the value of our GDP, about 1.2, 1.3 billion US dollars, we still grew at a modest sum of 0.4%. You can see that in 2016. Now, obviously, because of the various interventions we made in the economy, such as Help for Homes and the FNPF funds that people were able to withdraw, I mean, that injected about $250 million into the economy and thereby kept the economy buoyant. Now, it is unprecedented for the economy to grow for 9 years. I know Pramod Chand is sitting in the back there and he may, they raise issues, but these are the facts that the RBF actually will release. What has also happened, and this is also has an impact on your industry, is that the GDP per capita in Fiji has grown quite significantly. So if you look at the GDP per capita per person, it's almost doubled from what it was in 2006. On average GDP per capita, in other words per person, the income was $6,400. Today it's $12,000. This is why you see so many cars running on the road. Many people who used to catch buses no longer catch buses because they have their cars, and that's a fact. When people do well, they always want to buy a vehicle. In Fiji till today, people feel proud. They say, my daughter has bought the first car. My son has bought the first car. So it's a sign of what we call social mobility. And this is the reason why you have things like traffic jams. I mean, those of you who drive buses or have bus companies driving, in particular between Nandi and Lautoka, Nosori and Suva, you'll see all these traffic jams. You'll simply see that there are people, one person driving one vehicle. So what we've said also in Parliament, that we need to be able to look at how we can mitigate things like traffic jams. Apart from 4-laning roads, we need to be able to look at what we call bus lanes. As you know, you go to Sydney and various other places, between certain hours of the day, you'll have bus lanes. So you can say from 6:30 a.m. till 8:30 a.m., the left lane will only be used for buses. And that's how you're able to mitigate this. So that's how you actually get more people attracted to coming back to use buses who currently have moved away from using buses. Obviously, you cannot do that between Nandi and Lautoka because you have only 2 lanes. But that's one of the announcements we made, that we're looking at doing a 4-lane between Nandi and Lautoka. And some of the work has already started, the planning is out. So that actually has an impact on the passengers you carry and the types of passengers you carry. The other one, of course, is unemployment now is the lowest it's been for 20 years. 4.5% unemployment rate now, which means a lot more people have a lot more money in their pockets. When they're able to do that, and coupled with the fact that the interest rates offered by banks are quite low, a lot more people will want to have the opportunity to go and buy a car. And they will do that. Some may travel on your bus during the week, but on the weekends will drive their cars. So these are some of the things that you need to be able to know what's happening. Now, what are the areas that are contributing to the growth? It's very interesting. If you look at the areas that are contributing, do you want to go and sit there and have a look? You see, agriculture is relatively modest. Fisheries and forests, well, fisheries is very low, 0.03. Forestry is minus 0.13%. But the areas that are growing, as you can see, is manufacturing, construction, electricity and water, of course, and mining is very modest. But you can see construction is very high. You can see construction going on everywhere. We actually have a shortage of tradespeople in Fiji now. Some of you actually in that area would know that. We actually have workers now coming from Bangladesh, Philippines, and Indonesia to do high-skilled trades work because there is a shortage of people. So there's a huge demand, there's a huge pressure on that. This is why we set up the 13 technical colleges. When we set up the technical colleges, we have more people, for example, getting certificate training in bricklaying, plastering, what have you, all those sorts of areas, electrical works. In fact, just talking to some of the technical college head teachers, a lot of the people, when they actually come and do the coursework, then they go out and do the practicals, when they do their practicals, they don't come back because they already get offered a job even without the qualifications because they know how to do something. So there's a huge pressure in that area, but of course there's a lot of work in that area too. The services sector is one area that as a government we are very much focused on. Services sector is very, very critical for us because we see a lot of job opportunities in the services sector. You can see the financial services 0.75%. Transport is 0.25. Wholesale and retail 0.47. Accommodation, information and communication, another growth area, public administration. So we are doing some initiatives in the services sector, including the medical services sector as announced. For example, in the Lautoka and Ba Hospital, we are going to do a public-private partnership. We've already had expressions of interest from international hospitals. So the ability to offer a range of tertiary medical services in Fiji will completely change in a few months' time. So things like open heart surgery will be available at the very least. Areas in cancer and various other full tertiary care facilities will be available. We focus on Lautoka and Ba because it's closer to Nandi Airport. It makes logistical sense. You have a lot more people from offshore that will want to acquire the services too. And Ba, of course, is a new hospital that can, be used for these purposes. Please feel free to ask me any question later on. Now, this is one area that a lot of people don't understand, foreign reserves. Nearly everything that we have has got some foreign input. I'm holding this mic, it's imported. I'm wearing this much, it's imported. This lady is wearing some bangles, she's probably got gel in her hair, everything is imported. So we need foreign reserves. The buses you buy, most of you, even though it may be made by PA Lal, the components come from overseas. So the fact of the matter is we need foreign reserves because these people do not sell these goods to us in Fijian dollars. They sell it to us in Japanese yen, Australian dollars, euros, US dollars. So you need enough foreign reserves to be able to trade. Otherwise, as most countries, colloquially speaking, they'll say that you've gone bankrupt. If you don't have enough foreign reserves, you can't trade. Colloquially, people say you've gone bankrupt. Now, there's an international benchmark. You must, this is the number of months here, you must have at least 4 months worth of foreign reserves. That's a good place to be in, to have at least 4 months of trading. You can see where we were, for example, in 1980 where we were, in 2006 where we were was $519.1 billion, which was approximately 2.2 months worth of foreign reserves of trading. Today we have $2.2 billion worth of foreign reserves, and we have approximately 5.4 months worth of foreign reserves. It's very high, but it's a good position to be in because your ability to also negotiate rates. So when Fiji Airways goes off and buys 3 brand new aircrafts or A330s, a lot of it is financed by some German banks. The first thing they'll look at is the foreign reserves to see, well, could these people actually service my debt? So if you have a healthy foreign reserve, then your interest rate actually can come down. You have the ability to negotiate because you know, they know that you can actually pay the debt. So foreign reserves is very, very important. It helps us, cover our, not just our terms of trading. But what is really interesting, a lot of people don't realize this, that notwithstanding the fact that we've got $2.2 billion, there's still a lot more pressure on foreign reserves. One of the reasons why that is because a lot more people now today, and every day somewhere in Fiji, somebody is getting connected to electricity. Now, the moment people get connected to electricity, what do? They're going to buy a television set, they're going to buy a fridge, they're going to buy a washing machine, they're going to buy a microwave oven. These are now seen as basic necessities. All of these things, or none of these things, are made in Fiji. They're all made offshore. So obviously it puts greater pressure on the foreign reserves. Notwithstanding that pressure, we've seen a very healthy position as far as foreign reserves are concerned. Visitor arrivals, again, it has an impact on you too. Today we have 842,884 visitors coming to Fiji. Nearly the same number as the number of Fijians we have. The last census, our population number is 894,000. 882,000 Fijians were registered. There's 882,000 of us, and we get 842,000 visitors coming to Fiji. Hopefully they'll beat us soon. It's good for the economy. Sorry, just on that other point, I wanted to make a point, is that for us, as a government, our policy is to diversify our risk as far as the arrivals are concerned. We've been very heavily dependent on arrivals from Australia and New Zealand. They generally contributed approximately 67% of our total arrivals. What we want to do is grow the numbers from those countries. However, we want more Indians, we want more Chinese, we want more Europeans, we want more North Americans. Because that way you are able to mitigate your risk. If you only depend on one or two countries for your arrivals, if the economy does not do well in those countries, then we'll be affected quite dramatically. But if you, for example, have 20% arrivals from 5 different source markets, if one sector does not do well or one country does not do well, the economy still remains buoyant, your tourism sector still remains buoyant. So the whole idea is to mitigate our risks from that perspective. So what we've seen in the investment side, with a huge construction boom, growth of about 16.8%. New investment lending grew by 25% last year. Building permits issuance grew by 32%. Completion certificates rose by 36%. These are all verifiable figures you can get from municipal councils and RBF and town country planning. There's a very high confidence optimism in the private sector, evident from the RBF reserves, and very low interest rate environment supporting investment. We need to be able to manage the interest rates, and of course, that's supported by good monetary policy from the RBF to be able to ensure that we maintain that ability to be able to invest further and further. Strong consumption activity. New VAT collections increased by 13.9%. There's still a lot of nicking going on, chorrowing going on, but still despite that, we've had the VAT collections go up. New consumption lending has increased by 12.1%, which means the banks are lending more. More people are now accessing credit that they did not get credit before. So obviously they're spending more on consumption and also buying things like vehicles, etc. Now vehicle numbers, look at that. Total vehicles registered on road almost 120,000 this year compared to around 80,000 in 2006. This year meaning 2017. In 2016, an average of 41 vehicles were registered per day compared to 16 in 2007 and 6 in 1998. So you can see the amount of traffic that's actually on the road. Strong retail sales, the growth has gone up to 7.2% last year. Now, inflation, of course, as you know, there are two major impacts on inflation in Fiji. One is these people here, the fuel people. When the price of fuel goes up, the price of everything goes up, essentially. It affects inflation. So you can see the world price of fuel went up in 2011, going up through that whole entire period, went up to what, $145 a barrel, US at one point in time. That's, I think, when we did the negotiations with you. When you got to keep the VAT, so you no longer pay VAT, you keep the VAT component, and then we locked in the prices since then. And we did a lot of consultations, by the way. And, but as you can see, that when the price of fuel came down, inflation also came down. In fact, it went very low. And we were able to maintain our also local prices down too. But the other thing that affects inflation in Fiji is cyclones. So you can see when Winston came along, inflation went up to 6.8%. A small bunch of bananas in Suva after Winston cost $20. Used to normally cost $5. A bundle of long beans costs $5. You normally cost $1.50, $2. That's what cyclones do. They actually kill people. They damage enormous amounts of infrastructure, which costs a lot of money. And of course, it puts up the price of goods, in particular commodity prices. Now, a lot of people are talking about debt in Fiji without necessarily understanding debt. And one of the best ways of measuring debt is your debt to GDP ratio. Your debt is a percentage of your GDP. So the value of your GDP, and then you measure your debt as a percentage of that. Now you can see that government's debt at one point in time set at about 56.2% as a percent of GDP. Today we sit at 45.5%, and that's been a policy that we have undertaken to be able to ensure that we have a steady decline as a percent of our GDP. Now what it also has meant is that our GDP has actually grown. So while your nominal debt has gone up, which you can see on the right hand side, which sits at about $4.6 billion, our debt as a percent of GDP has come down. The example that I use with high school students when I go out and talk to them about the budget is this. The simple example I give them, I say to them, assuming you have $100, which could be taken as your GDP, and you go out and borrow $20. So you say that your debt to GDP ratio is 20%. So your $100, you borrow $20. But then you decide to you decide to sort of borrow $50, 2.5 times more than what you borrowed. But your income has gone up to $500. So your debt to GDP ratio is 10%. So even though you have borrowed 2.5 times more than what you originally borrowed, because you are now wealthier, as a percent of your GDP, it's only 10%. In the same way, a person, one of your bus drivers who may be earning, hopefully paying them about $30,000 a year, assuming they're earning $30,000 a year, if they go and borrow $500,000 or want to borrow $500,000, they won't be able to borrow it because the banks are not going to give it to them. But one of you who may earn $500,000 a year wants to borrow $1 million, you will actually get it because you have the capacity to pay the debt because your income level is higher. So this is the point that we're trying to explain when talking about debt. You don't simply look at this, the nominal sum, you actually look at it as a percent of your GDP. So for example, a very wealthy person may actually have a higher level of debt. So if you compare straight out, so a person who's earning, say, $100,000 may have a debt exposure of, say, $500,000. But a person who may earn $500,000 may have a debt exposure of $2 million. But they're comfortable with it because they can actually pay it. But for government, the most important thing is when you borrow, what are you borrowing for? That's the most critical point. If we are borrowing to have a party, if we're borrowing to pay for operational costs, then it's wrong. You would not in your business, for example, borrow money or should not borrow money to pay for your operational costs. You shouldn't borrow money to pay for your wages. You should not borrow money to pay for your fuel or your oil or your tires. You should be borrowing money to buy buses. This is what you call capital expenditure. So in the same way, we as a government are borrowing money to build. So if we borrow money, for example, to build a 4-lane road from Nandi Airport to Matintaro, and Denarau and all of that, that's actually what you call capital expenditure. It's going to give us a return. And the fact that we've built now means the future generations don't have to build in the future. The next 20, 30, 40 years, nobody has to do a 2-lane road there. So we've saved them the need to actually borrow in the future. So by building now, we're actually future-proofing ourselves. And if you look at things like, I don't know how many have noticed, but the 4-lane road from Nandi Airport to Namaka and all of those places, there's no overhead cables. Richard talked about climate change. To actually put those electrical cables underground and do all the future proofing is costing us about $20 million more. But the next time there's a cyclone there, there's nothing to blow down because it's all underground. So this is the type of capital expenditure that we are actually carrying out to be able to ensure that we are future proofing. Now, the other last point I'd like to make very quickly is that you see, you have a debt of about $2.8 billion sitting here in 2006. When Fiji became independent, the Ratu Mara government borrowed money. They borrowed money from FNPF. They borrowed money from ADB and World Bank and various other people. When the Ratu Mara government was no longer in place, the Rambuka government came in 87. The Rambuka government also borrowed money, but they have to pay the debt of the Ratu Mara government. Because their debts that the Ratu Mara government incurred, the term of those debts are 20 years, 30 years. When the Rambuka government was no more in place, you had the Chaudhry government. They borrowed money, but they have to pay the debt of the Rambuka government and the Ratumara government. When the Garase government came in place, they borrowed money, but they have to pay the debt of the Chaudhry government and the Rambuka government. Probably the Ratumara government debt is paid off. When we came into office, we inherited a debt of $2.8 billion that was incurred by previous governments. So that $4.6 billion is accumulation of the debt that we inherited from previous governments also. Thankfully, no government in Fiji has ever defaulted on any loan commitments. So everybody has actually paid off everybody's debt, which is a good thing because in many countries in the world, many governments actually default on the debts. And we have never defaulted on any debts, which is a good position to be in. Next, please. Now, let's compare ourselves to other countries as a debt to GDP comparison. Now, look at Japan's debt to GDP ratio. It's 239.2%. Singapore is 112%. The US is 107.4%. Canada, 92.3%. Their debts run into trillions. But nobody talks about their economies being a failure or financially risked. But people make a song and dance about Fiji, in particular people, you know, as we know who they are. Now, but let's compare ourselves. Let's compare ourselves. Look at a country like Maldives. These are island countries. Seychelles, Nauru, Mauritius. Everybody talks a lot about Mauritius. I had the fortune to go to Mauritius last year, only for about a day and a half or so. Mauritius is very similar to Fiji. The entire economy is dependent on sugarcane for a long period of time. They still have sugarcane. They also have tourism. They also had indentured laborers brought into Mauritius. Mauritius made a very smart move a few years ago. They're somewhat different to us. They did exactly what we are doing now, but they did it on a much bigger scale and wider scale. They said, well, look, we cannot simply be dependent on sugar and tourism. We have to actually expand our horizon. So they went and built 4-lane roads everywhere, internet connection. They built internet parks. They actually called in Indian hospitals to come and set up shop. They partnered with them. And then they went and marketed themselves to the continent of Africa. Africa is very close by to Mauritius, about 2-3 hours away. So they said to them, look, come to Mauritius to get your heart surgery done. Don't have to go to India or Europe. You've got the best hospitals here, and by the way, after your heart surgery, you can have 2 weeks holiday. They invited all the international companies that want to invest in Africa. But you know, the image of Africa is that it's not necessarily safe. So they got your IBMs and all the big companies to set up shop in Mauritius to serve Africa. They also had a very good system where they get foreigners to come and buy, strata title apartments as holiday homes. So in that way, they were able to attract them. If I can see the next slide, please. You see, this is what I'm talking about. See, Mauritius, the debt to GDP ratio is 62.7%, but the debt is 7.5 billion, this is in US dollars, 7.5 billion US dollars. High levels of debt, but it's good debt. Because that debt is paying itself off. It's giving new opportunities, creating more jobs. That's the way we look at what we are trying to do. Obviously, we don't have the same level of depth that they have necessarily, but they're able to position themselves. Our debt to GDP ratio is obviously 45.5. In US dollars, $2.35 billion. So a country like Australia, for example, even the debt to GDP ratio is 41.1, the total debt exposure, $517 billion. Look at the debt of USA, $19 trillion, 107.4%. Japan is $11.8 trillion, is 239.2. The reason why, even though USA has got a higher level of nominal debt and more than Japan, but as a percent of GDP, Japan is higher because their GDP is smaller than USA. USA is one of the largest economies in the world. Fiscal deficit, as you know, the budget is around the corner. And every year, most governments in the world run what they call fiscal deficits. In other words, we actually spend more than what we actually collect. Fundamentally, that's how most governments are run. But you have to be able to manage that deficit. To be able to manage the deficit, you simply have to ensure that these lines here don't get too long. So what we have over here, for example, 2001, deficit of 6.2, very high, 5.3, 5.8. You can see what we were doing here. We were reducing the deficit to quite low, went down to 0.5, but we had Cyclone Winston. So with schools alone, we had to go out and borrow over $200 million to rebuild schools. If Winston had not occurred, we wouldn't have had to borrow that money. So debt would have been lower, and the deficit actually would have been lower. But you can see that's where the rebuild is. Now, one of the good things is that income tax, as you know, the income tax threshold has come down. Threshold has increased. You see, in 1975, if you earned more than $600 a year, you paid tax. Today, if you earn $30,000 or less, you don't pay any tax. We moved significantly. And of course, the significant changes came around about here. In 2005, when it was 8,840, 2008, 9,000, then we jumped from there to 15,000. So suddenly you had all these people who used to pay money as taxes, they no longer pay it as tax, they keep it in their pocket. So some of them are smart, they'll go and save that money and they'll buy a car. Some people may drink it all in beer. Some people go and eat Chicken Express. It's a fact. I've been to the stores and they tell me, you know, whenever you announce this, a lot more people are eating Chicken Express. So I run out of chicken by 3 o'clock. What does that mean? When you give people more money in their pocket, it means they're going to spend the money. When they spend money, they pay VAT. We collect VAT. But when they go and eat more chicken, it means that rooster poultry, red rooster and crest chicken will have to farm out more chicken farms. If you have more farmers having to grow chicken, it increases their income levels. That's a hardcore fact. That's how you bring about robustness within the economy, and that's the effect of bringing about those policy changes. You can see our revenue has also increased. In 2006, the government collected about $1 billion in revenue. Today, we collect about $3 billion in revenue. What does that mean? It means we have to now borrow less. We are able to pay for our operational costs from the revenue we generate, plus we have a surplus. I'll show you in the next slide. Oh no, it's not that one, sorry. Can we just go to that one? Okay. We had it in the back. There. Oh. Okay. No, the next one. Okay, let me give you an example. From 1980 to 2006, in 27 years, whichever governments were there, they spent $3.5 billion in capital expenditure. Okay? And the debt increased by $2.6 billion. From 2007 to this financial year, which is about 11 years, we've spent double that amount, $7 billion in capital expenditure, with debt increasing by $2.5 billion. So we've spent double, the debt is increased by $2.5 billion. They spend half of what we spend, the debt is increased by $2.6 billion. Why? Because we are saving more money. So as the last slide shows there, for every dollar of capital expenditure between 1980 and 2006, 76 cents was borrowed. In our case, we borrow only 33 cents because we actually have a higher savings level. We save about $800 million approximately at the moment. So you can see that over there. Or it's about $700 million. Operating savings, we save about $792 million. So whatever we save, we put into capital expenditure. Just go into that one about the infrastructure one, yes. Okay, this is just what we've done is lumped infrastructure development, health, education, access to justice and social protection, and did a sort of to show you how the amounts have increased. So you can see the social protection is things like social welfare, disability allowance. We pay that now. Also, there are a lot of Fijians who, for example, have been cane farmers, villagers, living in maritime areas, in deep rural areas. All of these people, most of them, in particular women, they've never worked for anybody formally before. Right? Some of them may have worked as what we call house girls. They've never worked for any formally. So they don't have any FNPF. A lot of these people are now getting old. So when they get old, they don't have any pension. They don't have any FNPF. They never worked for anybody. The guy who's a villager in Kandavu is now 68 years old. He never worked for anybody. Person may be a cane farmer. Some lady who is the wife of somebody no longer has any FNPF or never had FNPF. Now she's old, she's got no source of income. So to those people, we give them $100 a month to be able to give them some form of social protection. It's very important. You'd be surprised how the social relations are changing now. Many children no longer look after their parents. A lot of people have moved away, some have migrated, some have moved to Suva, away from the rural areas. A lot of these people need to be looked after. So we've increased the allowances for that. We give, for example, food vouchers for rural pregnant women. There's a whole theory behind that. If we give them nourishment now whilst they're pregnant, they'll be healthier, they produce better babies. Babies will be healthier. The babies are healthier and the mothers are healthier, there's less pressure on the medical system. It's also good for them as productive members of our society. So there's a lot of areas that we are assisting in the social protection. Access to justice, legal aid. There's legal aid office in every single town and city in Fiji now. A lot of people are getting access to that. For example, if people don't draft a will, women get abandoned, children get abandoned, domestic cases, criminal cases, we do all of that for them. It's mandated under the Constitution. Education now, as you know, education is free now, right all the way up to high school. We have the scholarship program now. We have TELS now. It's all based on merit, not based on ethnicity, what religion, what ethnicity, what province you are. It's basically based on merit as to how you get scholarships. And also in respect of TELS, if you do not get a scholarship, then you cannot afford to go to university, we pay for you to go to university. So today there are more than 16 to 17,000 students in universities and technical colleges. That's the highest it's ever been. Why? Because they have access to this. There are so many people in Fiji who I've met, they said, I wish in my time we had it. I would have been able to finish high school. Or I wish in my time they had it, I would have been able to educate my children. So today, in fact, we have now more girls in schools too, because before when you had a large family, the families had to make a decision. So the girls actually stayed home because they'd get married in any case, but so the boys went to school. So as a result of that, it's brought about a lot more changes. As a result of that, it has an impact on your industry too. Because when you have people with more qualifications, they look for other jobs. When generally the trend was, you became a bus driver, you could not get a job somewhere else. It used to be like that. You drove a bus. So now the pool of people that you'll be able to access will be limited too. There's a challenge for you. I mean, if you're talking about the future, how do you attract people to work in the bus industry? How do you make it more attractive apart from salary? Do you have like career paths? You need to think about that. Because it's changing, it's evolving. We have today more SIM cards than actual people in Fiji. I know some of you keep more than one SIM card, for some of you for legitimate reasons, some of you illegitimate reasons. But we have more SIM cards than people. We have nearly 600,000 smartphones. What does that mean? By end of July, we're currently working on a project where you'll be able to watch your television on the phone. Now you've got e-ticketing now, we were looking at NFC. Near field communication, which basically means I take my phone, I tap it on the machine, it takes the money off my phone. That is going to happen very soon. That's some of the things you need to talk about, and that's some of the policies, that's what it's driving towards. Health. Health, of course, as you know, that we are investing a lot of money in health. We've increased the doctors' salaries by up to 80%. In fact, another 15% have been given. A lot more people are going to that space. And of course, infrastructure development, roading, bridges, jetties, etc. Okay, one of the last few slides. When you spend in the same way with your, slightly different with businesses, but you have two basic cost components in your business and in your government. One is your day-to-day operational expenditure, and the other one is your capital expenditure. Now, the trick for most governments is to be able to ensure that you have a very high level of spending, or good level of spending, I should say, in your capital expenditure. So every year when we announce the budget, if we have only about 13–12% going into capital expenditure, you won't see much development. You won't get many people connected to electricity or water or four-laning of roads. So the idea is to be able to control your operational cost in the same way you do. You try and control your operational cost. If you look at the expenditure mix, in 2006, only 14.7% of what government spent in the budget announcement went into capital expenditure. Only 14.7%. Today, 41.4% goes into capital expenditure. So we've reduced our operational cost and spent more in capital expenditure. This is why you're seeing so much development. This is why everybody's getting, or a lot more people are getting connected to electricity, water, and all of that. And that's very, very important. And you know, when you connect people to electricity, you'll be surprised how it changes their lives, apart from watching TV and all of that. Person who's catching fish, if he's selling fish by the roadside, he knows he does not have a cooler or fridge at his home, he'll need to sell the fish by the end of the day. So you come along in the afternoon and knock him down. Something, it's a bundle of fish that he's selling for $50, he'll probably sell it to you for $10. Because he knows he can't keep the fish, otherwise he has to eat it himself. He's probably sick and tired of eating it, or has to give it away or the fish will rot. But the moment you connect him or her to electricity, they won't bring down the price. They'll keep it in the cooler, they'll put it out the next day, throw some water, you drive past, there's a fresh fish for sale. They sell it to you for $50. So you've increased the income level. This is the level of empowering that electricity connection, water connection does. We went and connected, for example, some villages in Vanuatu. We went with the Honorable Prime Minister. The women and the men generally spend nearly 2 hours a day carrying water for their drinking purposes, cleaning purposes. Those 2 hours no longer need to be used. So maybe they can spend the 2 hours doing a tete, planting stuff, productive use. So this is very, very important to connect people to those basic amenities. Again, this is the funding for roads, bridges, and jetties. As you can see, this is essentially reflected in the FRA budget. And the funding you can see has increased quite significantly. Of course, you've got new tar-seal roads and four-lane roads, etc. And the allocation has increased tenfold. Electricity and water, again. We also provide subsidized electricity. If you earn less than $30,000 a year, we pay 50% of your electricity cost. The tariff, we pay for that. And of course, for water too, we do that. So what we have done as a policy, we try and help people at the lower end of the socioeconomic scale. So there's more money left in their pocket. So imagine a few years ago, a person who's earning $20,000 and they had 4 or 5 kids. Every beginning of the year, they have to fork out school fees. They have to pay for electricity. They have to pay for water. They have to pay for medicine. Now they no longer have to pay for education. They pay only 50% of the electricity costs, 50% of the water, or we give them free water up to 90,000 liters of water. So it puts less pressure. It puts less pressure on you as employers actually to have salary demands too. You need to think of it in that way too. So what it has done is empowered people. I hope all of you have filled out your forms to get your shares with Electricity Fiji Limited. All of you are entitled to, as long as you're an electricity account holder, you're entitled to 150 shares. And if you earn less than $30,000, you'll get 250 shares. This is for the first time that we're actually giving people shares. I mean, one of the reasons why we're doing that, we want people to feel empowered. We're going to partially divest our shares, but we want people to be able, that's an investment for them. We want people to think of shares as a form of an asset that they can gain income from. Of course, they have the opportunity to sell it further down the track. Again, this is the sort of amount of money we're spending. This year we're spending $794 million in the education sector. Of course, some of it is linked to the rehabilitation build, at $964 million there. Improving health medical services, I already highlighted that to you. We provide a number of facilities there. Again, poverty benefit scheme, social pension, child protection, food voucher, rural pregnant women, allowance for persons with disabilities. We also, for companies that engage people or who employ people who are disabled, we give you a 300% tax write-off. 300%. So if you have people who may be disabled that you think can do your job, try and employ them. You benefit too, they will benefit too, because they get a sense of dignity too, and I appeal to all the companies here. So this is a summary actually, economy on track for the 9th consecutive year, broad-based growth, inclusive, lowest tax rates, the highest tax collections, etc., lowest unemployment rate in 20 years. So I hope that's a quick summary, ladies and gentlemen, of the economy. I hope that puts into perspective where we are as far as the economy is concerned. I think more specifically for the bus industry, one of the key areas, of course, that I'd like to highlight is the issue of e-ticketing. The feedback that we've got, of course, is that e-ticketing is working. There's, of course, with any new system, there will be niggling problems with it. I don't know how many have appreciated the fact, but with this, the CARE project that we've launched after the cyclone, we've provided a $50 top-up for all those people who've been affected by Cyclone Winston. We've given you new revenue because they will need to spend that money on your buses. It's a $50 top-up. And we've also assisted you by saying the condition of them getting a $50 top-up is that they need to have a permanent card. Otherwise, they don't get the top-up. So we've given more people, encouraged them to get more, get them to have a permanent card. As you can also see that we've asked Vodafone to also assist in some of the areas. They've now provided what you call various top-ups on the cards, encouraging people so they can use more of the permanent cards, which is helpful for you too. It's interesting that we constantly get asked questions in Parliament. I think there's a question coming up next week in Parliament saying, why can't you have a dual system running? Again, this thing has come up. It's not going to work. Everybody knows that. The moment you say you're going to have a dual system, I mean, you'll go back to the same old problem. So we have to persevere with it, and the fact of the matter is it is working. There are some issues. Of course, we've had some discussions, some very frank discussions with Vodafone also. John here, who's from our office, has been liaising with them, and we have some very strong words with Vodafone in terms of upping up their service, and hopefully you'll see some change in the systems there too. The other issue, of course, is that what the President highlighted regarding the issues pertaining to LTA. And again, the board is, I understand, doing some work with you. And the board, of course, has got a different focus. They're going to engage a lot more with you in respect of some of the issues that they do have. And I think we have to be able to manage that relationship. Regarding the I think the future of the bus industry, and these are some of my thoughts in respect of the bus industry. Like I said, because of technology and because of the changing demographics in society, a lot of changes will take place in the next few years. And I think as individual bus companies, you need to be able to strategize as to how your bus company will be relevant. 50% of the entire population of Fiji is below the age of 27. 50%. 70% of the population is below the age of 40. Now, a person who is 60 years old will think very differently to a person who's 20 years old, or vice versa. You need to be able to understand what your market is. If you have a bus that's got Wi-Fi on it, and you've got another bus next to it that does not have Wi-Fi on it, at the same fare, or maybe 5 cents more, who do you think the young person is going to go into? Which bus? These are some of the realities. If you have a bus that has tarpaulin as windows, and a bus that does not and has a proper window and may have air conditioning, who do you think they'll go on the bus with? These are some of the things that you need to consider and how you need to position yourself. Of course, as you know, with the budget announcement, and we actually talked to some bus companies, and we have now given you all 15-year licenses. We have also now said, by way of regulations, you can actually sell your licenses without having to refer to LTA as such. You have the ability to mortgage your licenses, and the banks can now accept that as secure collateral. You never were able to do that before. So we've given you an asset. The license itself is an asset. The same with taxi drivers. They all now have a 10-year license. They can go and mortgage the license. So you see, you have a number of opportunities. And I can't necessarily give all of you specific business advice, but I can, as in somebody who's interested in the bus industry, I can already see how some of you can actually either sell to each other or form some kind of conglomerate. You can do that, actually. And you may need to do that to survive. The days of running 2-3 buses and trying to compete with others may not necessarily be there anymore. So I think these are some of the issues you need to consider, and how your association can actually help you do that. That's some of the issues that you need to think about. But the fact of the matter is that it's rapidly changing. The fact of the matter is more people, for example, have cars. Now, if, for example, which we hope to start very soon, once we start the bus lanes, say between Nosori and Suva, we have to ensure that those people who are currently driving to work in their car jump onto your buses. We have to get them to do that, otherwise it's not going to work. So assuming that I live in Davulevu, right, inside. Now, the bus that travels on an express from Nosori to Suva is not going to go inside there. So, but assuming I want to catch the bus, I'll have to come to the main road. How will I come to the main road? I'll need to bring my car. So we need to have a space available for my car to be parked. The same way you go overseas, I'm sure many of you have relatives overseas. They'll drive from their home to the railway station, they'll park their car at the railway station, they jump in the train, go to work, come back in the train, jump in the car, come back home. That's how we need to be able to look at buses in Fiji. So people can come from their homes to the main road, park their cars somewhere, catch the bus, because for them they'll say, because of this bus lane, I can get to Suva in 20 minutes. There's no obstruction. Why should I burn my fuel? I can go to work very comfortably without any stress, come back and I come home. And they can all drive their cars on the weekends. So you see, these are some of the things you need to consider. You need to be able to work with LTA, you need to be able to work with us, to be able to say how you can contribute towards that. So ladies and gentlemen, I hope that that's given you some food for thought. It is very fast evolving. Technology is very much there. We are also looking at, for example, how we can make electronic transactions a lot more easily available. You can walk into a store in New Zealand and use your ATM card and buy a bottle of water for $1.50. If you go to a store and try and buy a bottle of water for $1.50, nobody will let you use your card in Fiji. But that's going to change. It will change because we're looking at some policies as to how we can encourage companies to do that. And we need to do that. So how far are you up to speed with that? That's some of the things you need to consider. As we've said, we've also looked at perhaps opportunities where things like minibuses need to be using e-ticketing too. Then we can also, for example, look at the pricing. It'll also help you. So these are some of the changes that are actually taking place, some of the changes we're envisaging. And we of course value the input by the bus companies in Fiji. As Richard has said, that we call it public transportation, but it's provided by the private sector. In most countries, when you say it's public transportation, it's actually provided by the state. So you have provided a wonderful service, and of course, you know, for decades, most of you are family-run companies. They've been there for decades, and of course appreciate the input. Times are changing. We need to be able to look at how we can also, you know, work on a truly, you know, private sector basis. We accept the fact, for example, that when we did the negotiations when the fuel prices were high, and we asked you to keep the VAT, and you, for example, are carrying some of the passengers, the disabled persons, etc. We are currently looking at that as to how we can make sure that we have a good commercial arrangement with that, as opposed to you simply depending on the agreement that was done a few years ago. So we are reviewing that as part of the budget analysis that we are currently carrying out, because we obviously want you to do well too. But we want everybody to work on a transparent basis. So we will be looking at those features as far as the budget is concerned. I would urge the Fiji Bus Operators Association to also, you can individually do it as bus companies or as individual citizens, or even as an association. You can make the submissions to the budget. As you know, we had planned for widespread public consultations, but that got, some of them got cancelled because of the fact that we had those couple of cyclones that came along. We still have probably 1 or 2 budget consultations, public consultations. I urge you, if you want to come to that, you can. Or alternatively, please give your submissions, and we've got the address there. It's in budget consultation, economy.gov.fj, or you can go online to look at our budget submission. We didn't bring the budget books, but you can post it or hand deliver it to those addresses. But I urge you to go to the portal, the www.fiji.gov.fj, and you go to the budget tab. You'll see the entire budget there. You see the entire budget. You can go through, you can see in Ministry of Transport which department gets how much money there for wages, how much money there for electricity. You can go and see there's also pamphlets there that shows you which village, which settlement, which homes or group of homes will be connected with electricity, who will get water, who will get water tanks. Everything is there. So it's what we've done in the past couple of years, provide as much information as possible, because, you know, I still have people calling me up and say, hey, in the budget you said that our settlement will get 10 water tanks. Where are the water tanks? Which is good. We want people to be accountable, so then I can pick up the phone and say to Water Authority of Fiji or whoever is responsible for it, where are the water tanks? So we actually now mark our performance based on the budget submission that I made, and it's actually put on online too. So please go to that. I hope that we can have some discussions. I mean, if you want, I don't know, Richard, how you want to run this, whether you want to have any questions. I'm quite happy to answer any questions that you may have. Thank you. Inaka.